GST has been a path-breaking reform by in the country. It does take years for it to stabilize. We are, I think, the 158th country also to introduce GST in the world. And each of the countries have taken about 3 years, 4 years to stabilize. In fact, a couple of countries have found it difficult to really go on with the implementation and have gone back to the earlier regime. But I don't think we will see that situation here. It is there to stay. It will also be stabilized over a period of time. But then today we are only discussing 3 years of journey of GST, what has happened so far, and therefore where we are today, and what is it that maybe we should look forward, and what is it that we'll have to really see as maybe things that could have been done better. That's how my presentation would be. Now I have a small presentation to make. This will be a combination of the statistics, some of the legal issues, and the journey so far, so that all of us will know where, from my perspective, what I am talking. Now the agenda for this presentation will be like this. We will have an introduction on and the constitutional background of this levy, of this regime, few numbers in GST. Then we'll also have a look at some of the important concepts in GST. So if you have to look at the introduction of GST and the constitutional background, as Suresh Kumar sir was pointing out, these have been the many levies, both from the center and the state, that have got subsumed in GST. The central excise duty, the additional excise duties, service tax, CVD, SAD, and various surcharges, which were part of the central levies. Then the state levies as VAT, the CST, the entertainment tax, octroi and entry tax, purchase tax, luxury tax, etc. All these have got subsumed into what is called the GST. Now GST has essentially three components, three nature, I would say. One is a combination of CGST and SGST, and other is the IGST. Therefore, what happens in this tax is this. If you have an intra-state supply of goods and services, that is supply that happens within the state, then your GST will be broken up into two components, namely CGST and SGST, or CGST and UTGST. In other words, it is the central taxes that will get subsumed in CGST, the state taxes will get subsumed in SGST, and similarly the UTGST also will be part of the GST. Suppose we make an interstate supply, that is a supply across the state from one state to another state, it will be IGST. So when we talk about one nation, one tax, it is that the GST will be one rate, namely let us assume 12% or 18%. So when you make an intra-state supply, that 18% will be broken up into 9% towards CGST and 9% towards SGST. But if you make an intrastate supply, the entire 18% will be considered as IGST. So when we say that it is one nation, one tax, what it means is that when you sell or when you supply within the state or when you supply across the state, the rate of tax on a particular product will be the same, namely 18% or 12%. So if you have to buy, let's assume a refrigerator or an air conditioner, you buy it in Assam, within Assam, it will be, let us assume 18%. You buy it from Assam, but you are in Kerala, then the rate of tax will be the same, 18%. That's the logic of saying that it will be one nation, one tax. Now, few products have been kept out of GST. For example, alcoholic liquor for human consumption, that is still subject to state excise and VAT. Similarly, petroleum products, as of now, is not part of GST, but that could be brought under GST at a later point of time. That's the amendment that has been made. Certain tobacco products will continue to be subjected to excise duty, NCCD plus GST. That there is a small gray area on that, but as of now, these This will be the situation for tobacco products. Now, constitutional provisions, if you see, that enabled the levy of GST was 246A, Article 246A, Article 269A, and Article 279A. Article 246 of the Constitution earlier gave powers to the center and the state to levy taxes on the respective matters. That's how we used to have list 1 relating to the center, list 2 relating to the state, and list 3 having the concurrent powers, both the state and the center having concurrent powers. All that was under Article 246. Now 246A has been introduced, in terms of which the central government and the state government is empowered to simultaneously impose GST on intra-state supplies of goods and services. On the interstate supply of goods and services, Article 269A gives powers to the center to levy the IGST. Now, there is a constitution of a GST council enabled by Article 279A. The GST council essentially this is one of the big features of GST. This will essentially consist of the finance ministers of the various states and union territories, plus the union finance minister. Every decision taken in respect of GST is always taken by the GST council. They make a recommendation to the government after the discussions are being done. And in fact, to the credit of the GST council, at least till last year, most of the decisions that have been taken have been unanimous decisions. It's only, I think, the last 1 year or so, the decisions have been passed on the basis of a majority view, but otherwise it has been unanimous decisions. So once the GST council recommends, then the government issues the notification or the rates. The states then follow that. So now, as I said, as far as the petroleum, crude, high-speed diesel, oil, etc. is concerned, they will be subjected to GST, but on a subsequently notified date. Just to give the journey that GST had effectively come across, and as Suresh Kumar sir was pointing out, it did start somewhere in 2000, 2001, but then it got discussed, it got lapsed, etc. But effectively, the actual discussion and the seriousness in the implementation of GST started in 2011, when the 115th constitutional amendment was introduced. But then the opposition wanted the bill to be sent to the standing committee for a detailed examination. So in 2013, after 2 years, the report prepared by the standing committee was submitted to the parliament. But then in 2014, that constitutional amendment bill got lapsed. And subsequently in 2014, when the new government came, Mr. Arun Jaitley, the late Shri Arun Jaitley, submitted the constitutional amendment bill in the parliament. And 2015, the Lok Sabha passed the constitutional amendment bill. Again, 2016, broad discussions took place, broad amendments were discussed, and ultimately the Honorable President gave his consent for the constitutional amendment bill to become an act. And in 2017, 1/7/2017, the GST laws came into place. Why I am pointing out this journey of 2011 and 2017 is that the 6 years was, in my view, as a person who has been seeing tax laws maybe from 1982, 83, 6 years maybe the government could have also utilized for putting in place better practices in terms of implementation of GST. I will come to it slightly later. But then the 6 years, while it enabled the passing discussion on the law, the various aspects of the law, as far as practice is concerned, maybe could have been used to put in place a better practice. Now, what was the expectation from GST? First expectation was, it's a simplified destination-based value addition taxation. So the tax should be simplified, so it should not have different rates of tax, it should not be on different aspects, on a particular activity, whether it is goods or whether it is services or a combination of both, will have one rate of tax. So that was the ultimate destination-based value addition tax. So value addition means so that every taxpayer at the earlier stage was to be available as credit, so that every person who is in the part of the chain pays tax only on the value addition. That was the whole objective of the expectation from GST. Simple and few tax slabs ensuring no inverted duty. Now, when we say inverted duty, it is where your output has a lower rate of tax and your input has a higher rate of tax. So even with the value addition, you will have a lot of credit available with you. So the credit can't get encashed. So the whole idea was have the tax slabs in such a manner that nobody suffers from an excess credit with them. Then clarity on the aspect of taxation as goods and services. In fact, the earlier regime, pre-2017 regime, did see a lot of disputes on whether a particular activity or a particular item would be taxed as goods or as taxed as services. In fact, classic example all of us are aware is with reference to your software, whether the implementation of software is really a service or giving the license to use the software was really goods. Therefore, the VAT department used to say it is goods and therefore subjected to VAT. The service tax department used to say it is really a service. So on the same maybe 100 rupees, you will have both the VAT department saying you should pay tax at 12%, the service tax department saying you should pay tax at 12%. So that is expected to go away from the ambiguity issue, and therefore clarity was expected on the aspect of taxation at goods and services. Then a simplified valuation methodology. So whatever amount you receive, you pay tax on that. Then seamless transitioning of credit, because whatever credits you had in the pre-GST regime should be seamlessly moved to the GST, and seamless uninterrupted flow of credit. So whatever tax you pay and you use those inputs or goods, services for your business, you should get the credit. Elimination of double taxation. Then IT-based compliance and administration. So as Sir was pointing out, the whole purpose was to ensure that there is less of human interface, that is more based on the systems, so that you sit in your place, load in your returns, and then automatically the compliance takes place. The administration also doesn't need to look at the places of the SSCs, but they can see what exactly is the activity being done. So, and then clarity on jurisdiction. Who will tax whom? Do I come under the state? Do I come under the center? Should I talk to both, or only one will take care of me? So this was the expectation from GST. So now we will see whether these expectations have been fulfilled at the end of the session. But few numbers in GST. This has been the registration trend as far as GST is concerned. April 18, we had about 1 crore of registrants, these active taxpayers. And in June 19, it increased to 1.23 crores. And then June 20, it's almost the same, 1.23 crores. But yes, there has been a steady increase in the number of active taxpayers. Now, this is the tax collection that was made from 17 to March 18 and April 2018 to 19, where the highest collection was somewhere in April 2019, representing about 1 crore 13 lakhs 865 crores of total GST, having all combinations, GST, SGST, cess, etc. So yes, there has been an increase in the number of taxpayers. There has been also been an increase in the collection of taxes, and the total e-way bill being generated was initially about the total is about 70 crores, and both e-way interstate and intrastate e-way bills break up. And in fact, in one particular day, statistics came out. The number of e-way bills that were generated was about 25 lakhs on 29 February 2020. Of course, this was before the COVID. And thereafter, maybe last couple of weeks or fortnight, there has been a steady increase of the movement in the number of e-way bills and all that. This one interesting statistics that the platform of GST has so many followers. The Twitter, the Facebook and all that has so many followers. So it only means that people are getting into all this to really know where they stand, what exactly they are expected to do, what is the clarity that is available. Now, here starts the, I would not say problem, but then the conflicting views, etc., starts coming from here. We had about In central taxes on rate and non-rate tax, about 395 notifications that have been issued the last 3 years. On integrated tax, about 137, cess about 15. Then we had about 141, 146 circulars being issued from time to time, and then about 18 orders. So totally there are about 711 notifications and circulars that have been issued in these 3 years. Maybe the question normally people ask is, would we be better off in not having issued these circulars, read the law as it stands, and then take our view? The answer is yes or no. The answer is yes to a larger extent, because sometimes these circulars do create a sort of an conflicting views where none existed before. But then some of the circulars have really clarified what was the position. It put in place what was the thinking of the government, which more or less was also in line with the law. But then there are a few circulars and notifications that did create a furor. About 982 advance ruling orders have been there, and about 157 appellate authorities orders. I think everybody practicing in GST, both the companies, the practitioners, would agree that if there was one aspect of GST that has been a disappointment, is only the manner in which the advance rulings orders have been passed. I'll refer to some of this in the later part of my presentation, but we had conflicting advance rulings being passed on the same issue. Then some advance rulings which in my limited experience was quite outrageous advance rulings. So the whole purpose of advance ruling was whether can a business entity be, he wanted to know whether what is the tax he has to pay, what is the value on which he has to pay, etc. So he goes for a business certainty. And then if he gets an advance ruling which goes completely haywire, then he becomes stuck, because it's binding on him, it's binding on the officers. And then these advance rulings also sometimes, even though it's applicable to a particular assessee, also has a persuasive value for the department to look at it in the same way. So this is one thing maybe which the department could really have a look. In fact, we were told that there's going to be a national appellate authority for advanced ruling. Notifications have been issued, but then we still have to see the future of it. But then this is slightly a disappointing feature of GST implementation so far.